All right, week 8. We have some class topics, and then we're going to get right into our topic of the day, which is doing some Visual Basic programming. Okay, so topic of the day first is DevFest. I've mentioned this, I believe, a couple times, but I help run an event here in Fresno, largest Google event in the Central Valley, and it's awesome. If you want to check it out, if you're really into this coding thing and you think maybe this is something you want to go into or add to your resume, good idea. And I can help get you a ticket. You just need to do the following. You ready? Email me, riowaller@gmail, and say I want a ticket. So check the site out, check the schedule out. We have right now 4 people from Google coming, plus some other awesome speakers, and it's going to be down at Bitwise. So check that out. Let me know if you'd like to go. Second thing is on our class topics is that we're approaching our week 9 mid part of the semester when you need to make a decision about this class. If you're doing well, then this discussion is not for you, but if you're not, then it's now's the time to really get caught up because as you see each week quite a bit happens and getting behind, further you get behind, harder it is to get caught up. So at 9 weeks there's a last drop date. So if you think you're not going to be able to change and get your grade where you want it to be, then at the end of week 9 is a decision that you need to make if you're going to withdraw or if you're going to continue on. Now, I recommend everyone continue on. That is, if you know you can make this class work. And if you're not able to do that right now, the question would be, can you change something? Are you willing to do that? So come talk to me if you want to talk about any of that in more detail. Okay, so what you're going to be doing here, besides the notes that you took, is I want you to take some notes on the concepts that we're going to cover in programming. In addition, you're going to provide me, I think right now, 3 print screens. Okay, and I will note when we're going in what you have to do. So on the write-up for this, I've provided you a website, and this website takes you to this online. This thing is awesome. You should really be grateful for this because it's going to really save us some time in our class. We get to cover Visual Basic one day, and you don't have to learn how to use the Visual Studio, which, by the way, I will say, if you plan on going into development, Visual Studio is not a bad way to go at all. So Visual Studio is Microsoft's full IDE for developing applications. And it's, again, if this is something you want to do, that is definitely something you could think about getting and even do this assignment in if you wanted. Okay? So as I mentioned before, from a popularity standpoint, Basic is becoming a little outdated. So, but it is still a requirement for some of the schools that take this class as transfer that we need to cover it. But when you Google popular programming languages, you can see, and you guys are learning HTML and CSS, and believe it or not, CSS is actually, there's a way to program CSS. But JavaScript right now, and I'm really happy that I get to teach it right now, is really fun. I have a whole class that I'm teaching, and I'm teaching it now once a year. Is really fun. But what we're about to learn is really about concepts anyway. So these things typically translate with whatever programming language you cover. Your first one's generally the one that is like, oh my God, but then after that, it's just learning the different ways the program language itself implements these ideas. Okay, so let's get over here. So when you come to this site, a couple things. Make sure you have VB.NET selected as far as your language. The type we're going to write is a console application. Compiler is default, and then it's set to auto run. And what that means, and you can see it here, is that here's where you write your code. Here's where you see the results of your code, and this gives you some interesting information. And when you do your print screens, make sure you've included all of this. And I'll take one in a little bit just to show you. So there's some commands here when you get started, some default setup. It does some imports, and basically it's saying use some existing code that's out there. Public means this module is available anywhere in my program, and then within the module we have subroutines. So here's our main subroutine. So what you can see is console.writeLine quote parentheses quotes is basically saying I'll put this into the console. So if you change this to your name or hello world, maybe how about this? From Rio, right? Notice that that automatically changes. It will run depending on your speed. You will see a little indication over here that it's running. So this command says on the console, which is here because we're writing a console app, write line this string. Okay, so in your notes, string. So when you see things in quotes, that's a string, and it's basically a string of characters, right? A string of characters. It could be numbers, right? So it could be numeric values, but when you have quotes around them, it's a string. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write a Visual Basic program. Okay, so the other thing I want you to do, and I'm going to put a single quote here, is these are comments. Okay, so these are comments. This doesn't run, doesn't output to the console, but it does allow you to comment your code, right? So first thing we'll do is my program, my payroll, because that's what we're going to write, program. Okay. So what do you have to do? Let's just, before we do the program, let's actually think about what we have to do. Well, first thing we have to do is determine, right? Determine the hours and pay rate, because that's how you figure out what you get paid, right? So the way we're going to determine this will change through the way we develop our program. We're going to first do it very simply, right? And then we're going to do it a little more contemporary, a little more sophisticated than the first way we'll do it. So first we determine and then we calculate, right? So what does payroll equal? It equals to hours times pay rate, right? So we're not only going to we're going to not only calculate, we're also going to determine payroll overtime. Sorry, determine overtime pay. So what is overtime pay? Well, it's anything over 40 hours, and in that case, our pay rate increases. Okay, so this is what our program is going to do. So just to kind of give you, right, an idea here. So as we're going along, you have that. So first thing we're going to do is just tell the user. So in this case, when you're interfacing with the console, you're interfacing like you're running the program that somebody wrote. But in this case, you're running it. You're writing it and running it. Okay. All right. So let's say hello world. Welcome. And this is where I want you to write some of your own content. These are just messages. Make this fun for you, right? Welcome to my payroll program. Okay. So this line, and I'm just going to, all I'm doing here is doing my shift and my down arrow to copy that line because I don't want to have to retype it, but I could, right? Console.writeLine. Now, by the way, syntax is important here. Okay. So when I show something upper or lowercase, make sure you do that. Okay, so I'm going to say this. I'm going to say another line. Now notice when I haven't completed the line, this stuff turns red. So this is errors in the program. There's bugs. It won't run right now because I don't have correct code. And if you don't have correct code and these are indications, then your program won't run. Okay, so I'm going to say hello, hello world. Welcome to Rio's payroll program. Okay, so then here I'm gonna do this. Hit enter to continue. Okay. So what this is, continue. So this is more content that we see down here. So now I'm going to actually have a pause in the program, but the way I'm going to do a pause is also the way, in a little bit, we'll use to gather input from the user. Then I'm going to do, oh, it keeps popping up there, read line. Read line, okay? And then I'll put these two parentheses. So what this changes about your program is it puts a pause in here, okay? Notice over here, it did add this prompt. so that it's waiting. So right now the program is waiting for input. Now the input can just be an enter to continue. So watch what will happen when I come down, click in here and hit enter, then the program actually completes. So it's actually complete at this point. There's no more prompt. It's ready to start again. Okay, so this read line is really nice because it just gives us the ability to do a couple of things really important in programming. One is to interface with the user and to give them prompts for how we want them to work through our program or when we're going to need things. Okay, so that's working with the user. So hopefully you're not only coding here, but taking a few notes as far as concepts, right? So the first thing, right, is we determine, actually, this should be modified, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to, actually, no, that's fine. We'll actually come back to that. Sorry. All right. So now we're going to do something very fundamental in programming. Okay. We're going to dim, which is basically define an area in memory, and we're going to give that little area in memory a name. Okay. So we're going to say hours. Okay. So we'll say hours equal, and let's say it's 40 hours. Okay. So then we'll dim rate equal. Okay. So 40 hours, $10 an hour, right? Pretty typical, right? It's very common. Unfortunately, I'm looking forward to the minimum wage increasing. So now what we could do is we could do another dim and we could say pay is equal to what? Hour times rate, right? So actually, wouldn't this make more sense to be hours, right? So we'll change this. So the thing is, whatever you change it to, if you change it to something else, it has to be consistent. Now, at this point, we've defined some areas in memory. We've given them values, right? And then we've determined the pay is just equal to one variable times another. So now what we want to do is we want to do console.writeLine pay. Okay. So what this is going to do, so we come down to our program, we're waiting for the line, for the enter for us to continue. So when we hit continue, then we output 400, right? So this is a basic concept of variables and calculations, something every program will do, and controlling the user input. Okay, now take your first print screen right here, okay, because we've at least calculated payroll. We haven't done overtime pay, which actually we could do that, but let's just for now go ahead and say, yep, that's at least our first step. So step one done. Take your print screen, place it into the shared with Rio, open that print screen, and then give me a link right here, right? So you'd do that. Once you get that link, then you would insert your hyperlink, and that would be your first print screen. Okay. All right. So back to our code right here. So this is very basic, but we can make this better, right? Because doesn't it make sense first that instead of defining these as hard-coded, and that's a term, hard-coding into the program is not the best way to do it. What we really want to do is we want to ask the user for this information. So we can use this concept of the console, right, to do that. So what we can say is dim hours is fine, but instead of hard-coding it, we'll say console dot read line. So what this is going to do is it'll ask the user for input. So now what we want to do though is we want to, and I'm going to go up here and copy this so I don't have to retype it, is I'm going to say enter your hours worked this pay period. All right. So what's this going to do? Well, actually, let's just do it, okay? Because we can still do the calculation, but instead of hard coding the hours, we're going to ask the user for it, okay? So down here, we hit enter, right? Enter the hours. So let's say it's 30 hours, okay? So then it would be 300. So see the difference? And it's really more, again, a little more sophisticated. Okay, so let's do the same thing for rate, right? So let's copy that. Let's go to before we define rate, and let's say enter what? Enter your, let's just call your pay rate. Okay, so and in this case, and this is where starting to kind of break some, you can do a couple of lines here just to kind of make things a little more clear, right? So in this case, what we want to do is the same thing we did up here. So instead of hard coding it, we want to ask the user for that input. And again, this still works because we've told it this variable is equal to what the user puts in. Okay, so enter. So I would say, let's say 45, and then pay rate of 15. Okay, so 675. But this is overtime, right? So this is where we're going to start thinking about, oh, I forgot something, actually. We're going to come back up here. I'm going to add me another, because what else would we probably want to get? Uh-oh. So besides this, wouldn't we also want to, what is your name? Okay. So wouldn't we want to ask the user for their name? Sure. So we're going to dim name is equal to console.readLine. Again, remembering when I have it defined in this way, I don't need those parentheses like I had up here. Okay. So now name, I'm going to capture that as well. Let's make sure that works. Okay. So we'll say hit enter to continue. Okay. What's your name? How many hours did you work? And what was your pay rate? I'm getting an increase. So 900. Okay, so now what we can do is come down here and kind of customize this message a little bit, make it a little more like reflective of what we're doing. So we could say your pay equals, and then I'm going to use the ampersand here because I'm going to place in here now variables. Okay, your pay equals, and then pay in this case. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to say Rio. I'm going to say 40. By the way, every time you have to click down there, I did notice that. And then I'm going to say 15. Okay, so 600, right? So your pay. Now notice this, is that one thing I need to do is put a space there. So when I output, it has that space there. And why instead of your pay, it said, you could say, in this case, couldn't you say name? So Rio, your pay, and then we do that ampersand again. Now again, you can play with this and do it, you know, the way you want as far as this content in here, okay? So now we're getting there. We're actually closer to a real nicer, more sophisticated program. We'll hit enter here. What's your name, Rio? Okay, hours 45. And now pay rate is going to be, and so it's going to say, Rio, your pay equals da 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 da. Okay, cool. So now time for your second print screen. And the reason I'm having you also take these sprint screens is that if you don't get this done in one sitting, that you could come back to it. One thing I've noticed is that if you get out of, or if you go away, when you come back and you open this site, it will generally, and I say generally, come back to here, okay? Okay, so the last thing we're going to determine, right? So we're going to, instead of determine hours, we're going to get the hours and pay rate from the user, okay? And then we'll calculate. Now we're going to determine payroll overtime, but we're also going to add something called a function. Okay, so come down here and after the sub, give me a new line. Give yourselves a new line here. Okay, and now we're going to define a function. Okay, I'm going to call private function. We're going to call it payroll. Okay, and when we do the parentheses here, this is going to take in variables. Okay, so we've defined variables up here, and now we're going to actually, and I'll show you how to do this, is pass them into the program, right? So we could name them something differently. Matter of fact, we could say A, comma B. Okay, All right, so we're starting to define our function. It's going to be private, very much like up there, but in this case is a function. We can call this function. Okay, so payroll AB, and we're going to, and I just got to look at my code because I don't remember a little bit, as decimal. Okay, because imagine you can have, we're defining the function, what it's going to return itself, right? So now we're going to say if, okay, oh, that's right. So actually, let me just go ahead and so I can get rid of that. I'm going to do in function. Is it end? Yeah, in function. Okay, so at least my error there will go away. Okay, so now that I have that, so I have a function called payroll. Before I've calculated it, but I'm doing two things. I'm adding the overtime functionality here. Okay, and instead of just calculating pay, in this case, I'm going to end up in a second here calling payroll, the function, okay, and I'll call it with hours, comma, rate. Okay, so I'm going to call it with the variables I've created, but in this case, when it's passed into the function, I can name these anything. Like I could call this, again, these variable names are important so that when people read your code later, it makes sense, right? But this is a very common thing when you call a function that we're going to call, that you pass two variables in, or you can do more than two, you could do one. But when you pass them in, then they could be different names, or they could also be the same name, okay? Hours and rate, okay? So now that we have this, we have a function, we're going to call it. Now we have to do some work in here, right? So first we're going to say if, okay, if our hours is greater than 40, right? Because that's the question. So now we're asking the computer if the hours are greater than 40, right? If the hours are greater than 40, then do something, right? So in this case, what's the condition? The condition here that we're looking at, does that if have to be capitalized? No, it doesn't, but it does need to be. Well, looks like it needs to be. Probably goes either way. So now we have to say that our rate over 40 is equal to our rate times 1.5, because that's your overtime. Okay, so now, oh, equal, not multiplied, so equal. So what we're saying is take whatever the rate that came in, multiply it by 1.5, and now make that the new rate. Okay, that's a really common line in programming that we see all the time, right? So that is, now we have this is a line of code that executes when that happens, right? So now we can do the end if, right? I think it's end if like that. So now we have we could have some other code here, right? We could actually do something else like this. We could say console write line. And actually it's kind of good to do this because we can see if it hits overtime pay. Congrats, you got more pay, more money. Okay. All right. So now we have to now because not every time when we call this functions will hours be greater than 40, right? So what we could do here is we could just say return. Okay, so now what we're doing is returning control up here. So now we'll say return, and when we return, we'll tell it rate, okay, rate times hours. Because at this point, if the rate has been bumped up, it's going to be, oh, sorry, that's hours. That's why it keeps erroring out. Okay, cool. So let's see if it works, right? So just to go over this, right? So if hours is greater than 40, then our rate is going to be bumped up and we're going to give them a message. If not, right, that's only in that situation, else it falls to the return, and the return is going to place control back to this line and then it'll hit here. So in this case, if it's not, it hasn't ran this upgrade of pay, and it'll hit here and return. So let's see if it works. Enter. We're waiting because after you code, sometimes it takes a little while for the machine to come online, right? Okay, so let's say I had 45 hours, which would indicate overtime. My hourly rate would be 10, let's say 15. So check that out. Congrats, you got more pay. Boom. And that's the pay itself. Okay. So this works. So when I hit dim here, I hit pay, it's going to call this function called payroll. It's going to pass into it these variables. Now, what I want to show you here, you don't have, now by the way, go ahead and take a print screen. So let's hopefully through this is your last print screen and you don't have to do this part, but I just want to show you. It doesn't matter what we call these things, okay? We could call this A, we could call this A because it's rate, right? So actually, let's make sure hours actually. So always be careful when you're doing what I'm about to do, right? So if I call this A, then wherever hours is at, I would also want to call that A, right? And then wherever rate's at, if I want to call it B, and this is the part you don't have to code, but take notes on, because I want you to see this, because it's an important concept in programming, right? So then we could say, what's this? So this would be A, and is that right? A is hours, B is rate, so it's actually return. You could do it actually either way, doesn't matter, one times the other. Okay, so let's see if it still works. Oh, let's hit enter. Let's hit Rio, and then let's hit 45, so we're still in payroll calculation. Oh, look, it froze. I love that because now we get to debug what happened, right? So let's see, let's make sure. Now, by the way, and this is good. I love this because this is actually real world, right? So let's actually run it again. So what happened where, and I'm just going to make sure that this didn't freeze on this. Let's see. Let's see what I did is I passed A and B. I said if A is greater than 40, then B, the rate, is equal to console log if returns, right? Don't see anything wrong with it. Looks okay because you can, and I was demonstrating the idea of that you can change these variable names. Return. Okay, I'll try it one more time. Oh, actually that was just enter. So what this really illustrates is the idea that sometimes when you write code, it doesn't work and you have to figure out why, right? So let's say 45. Pay rate was 15. Oh, actually it was just halting. It does work. I thought there was something wrong. So you didn't have to code this last part where I changed them. Really the purpose of me showing you is when you call a function, and in this case we're calling functions with two parameters, we're naming them based on what we got from the user. No matter what, this is fine because when it comes in, it's going to say that first this hour, whatever's in there is going to equal A and the rate will equal B, and we can still do it. But you should ask yourself, would we want to do that? I'm going to undo Control Z here, right? Why would I do that? Well, I might want to do that. I might not want to do that because this is much more readable. But I did that to illustrate the concept of calling functions and passing parameters. So in your notes, calling functions and passing parameters into them. So I know this is a little long. You've got your third print screen in there, right? So the last thing I want you to do, right, is I want you to give me some feedback here. How was this assignment for you, right? Because I know that following along with code, writing code typically is not that bad because somebody's telling you which direction to go, but I do want you to customize some of this content in here, right? So this would be your own payroll program. And by the way, I wouldn't have to actually place this enter, right? I could actually take that line out, and then like I was doing before, I was like asking first for my name. You could do that, right? That would make sense. And by the way, I'm going to run it again just to make sure, because now I'll run into the typical. So it should be 400, right? There we go. Cool. All right, so take your print screen. You've already done that for your third one, but also give me your feedback on this work. So the next programming language we will talk about after the mid part of the semester will be JavaScript after we do CSS. And some of these concepts will come back around, but they'll be handled a little differently in JavaScript. All right, have a fabulous day.